Happy Sunday, everybody. Hope you're all having a good week as the week one of Bloomborough comes to a close. And I wanted to start things off with talking about Untapped as a tracker, since I did just become an affiliate. So it's a very useful tracker. You can use it for a variety of different formats, and there are a couple of problems that the tracker reveals too with Magic the Gathering itself. One of which is what I've called MMR Shenanigans, where you're doing something to kind of affect the matchmaking in one of your games. So you can see, for example, here, we'll hide the name of who actually was running this deck. This deck looks like it's performing quite well, right? It's got 73% win rate. It's got 54 wins, 20 matches or 20 losses for for both really great on the play and the draw. One of the ways that you can kind of tell there's some funky stuff going on is whether or not they're coming up against, like, there's like no Rakdos Aggro as one of the top ones, right? And like your most common ones are Boros tokens and Rakdos Aggro. If you're not doing the MMR Shenanigans, right? To an extent, obviously it could be a small sample size and stuff like that, but I've seen enough people do this that I know that it actually works. So what people do is they intentionally throw somewhere between 50 to 150 games to lower the K value in the Glyco 2 system, which, if you know anything about like ELOs and chess and matchmaking and things like that, Magic has a problem with it a little bit, since you don't have the ability to actually lose rank when you're throwing all of these games. But then you just have these like crazy wins, 30-7, where you can just like plow through up to Mythic. Now, the good news is that when you get to Mythic, your MMR puts you down at a lower rank. And so a lot of times when you're looking at decks, if you are using Untapped and you're looking at like the meta decks, you can kind of look at where they placed in Mythic to get an idea. Now, since it's so early on in the format, they placed as a numbered Mythic. When it's later, you'll see people place below 95% in Mythic, and then you know that there at least is a possibility that there could be some MMR shenanigans if the win rate is high, right? The other way that you end up in a lower percentage in Mythic is you get there by a lower win percent. Because you can grind a Mythic with a sub 50% win rate. It just takes more. It takes a longer time. You have to chain wins through a lower percentage, and there's lots of stuff online about it if you want to read about it. But I thought I would just talk about it because every Sunday what I do is I go through and do a best of one meta breakers, where I look at this data. I look through all of the people who have been hitting Mythic, and I pick out the decks that are not covered in my best of one, best of three meta review. Now, this week, I do have to admit, we had a little bit of a lack of off-meta picks. So, for example, I'll just show you real quick here. The 6 that met my criteria this week were, so it has to be at least 50 games, it has to have at least a 60% win rate, and there has to be no MMR shenanigans going on. So like that Gruul Aggro deck that I opened with here is not included, right? And the downside is nothing off meta made that criteria this week. It is early on in the format, people are still figuring things out, but we see the 3 that I was talking about in my meta review on Mondays, where you've got 3 different versions of Rakdos Aggro, 2 different versions of Boros Auras, and then 1 version of Azorius Oculus. So we'll just walk through them really quickly. And you can also, I almost forgot to plug, if you want to download this tracker yourself and keep track of your own matches, so you can figure out what you're coming up against and how, what the deck is performing well against, what the deck is performing not so well against, look for the affiliate link in the description for Untapped. All right, so now let's get started here. My organization is a little bit all over the place, so sorry, we'll have to kind of bounce back and forth a little bit. But this one's Rakdos Aggro by Pagal, who hit Mythic 169. No MMR shenanigans. They went 168 and 110 for a 60% win rate. And again, this is all available on Untapped under their meta page. If you want the link, hit me up in the comments below. I'll be sure to share it. So anyway, we've seen this deck before. You're basically looking to mulligan. One of the lines that you're looking for is to mulligan for Leyline of Resonance in your opening hand. I think mulling down to 5 until you hit that can be a strategy. The other thing that you're looking to do is have Slickshot Show Off and 2 combat tricks with Callous Sellsword. So that's another turn 3. This is a turn 3 win. Monstrous Rage, turn Inside Out on your Slickshot Show Off, and then fling it with the Callous Sellsword. Hits for 20 damage. The other one is Cacophony Scamp with the Leyline in play. Hit it with a turn Inside Out, and then fling it with the Callous Sellsword. That's a turn 2. Also works with the Heartfire Hero. So you're basically like, when you're looking at your opening hand, try to figure out how this deck is going to win by turn 2 or turn 3. If you don't have a turn 2 or a turn 3, you probably want a mulligan. You can be off by like 1 card sometimes and kind of try to, cheese it into drawing your combat trick in time. But if you're struggling with this deck, that might be because you're not mulliganing well enough, or your mulligan strategy could be improved. How about that? This version, there's a couple of things that they did a little bit differently. So they brought in the Screaming Nemesis, and what I think this does is help improve the deck's ability to go a little bit longer if your opponent does have a cut down or a go for the throat, which this deck can struggle against the early interaction. The other thing too, they brought in Rockface Villages here, and I like to treat them as combat tricks and not lands. So personally, I'd be on 17 mountains with the 2 Rockface Villages. Because this deck can operate with just 17. But this allows you to basically use this as a recurring combat trick, which can work well with your Valiant triggers, which can also help extend the deck a little bit further. This one is Rakdos Aggro by REUS7K, and hit Mythic 228 this week. This was a smaller sample size at the end of Diamond. They went 40 and 27 for a 60% win rate. And this is a little bit more of the, this is the Leyline less version, which I still think works quite well. You're leaning, you don't have the turn 2 capability, but you have, still have the turn 3 off of Slickshot Show Off. And they brought in the Shock so that they have some interaction against the other Rakdos Aggro strategies. Then they did bring in a fair amount of alternative black lands instead of the more expensive rares. So that they can play the Callous Sellsword. Again, I don't think that is necessary, and you can do 17 or 18 lands. When you're leaning more into the later part of the curve, it's more common to see slightly higher land counts compared to the one that we saw in Best of 1. And then, because we're not running the Leyline, you can run Mirren Bane Splitter. And the Leyline duplicates your instances and sorceries, whereas Bane Splitter doesn't get copied. But it works really well on Cacophony Scamp and Heartfire Hero, making their power higher. So, excuse me. Been getting over a cold, and it's still kind of bugging my throat. So you can use the Mirren Bane Splitter to permanently increase the power of these, so that if they are removed without exile, they do more damage. So that's the upside there. Blazing Crescendo gives us a little bit more dig. I'm not 100% sold on all of these tap lands personally, but this person I think was working with a little bit of a budget. And you can see that like this deck is still, you are able to still climb to Mythic even if you don't have the optimum version of the deck. And this one is going more for a strictly mono red build. So like I was saying, you don't need to run the black sources. This one was Rakdos Aggro by Levy, Leve, and hit Mythic 227 for 7642 for a 64% win rate. And still built off of the Leyline, not running the Slickshot Show Off. So this one is all in on trying to figure out how to get the turn 2 win, and not running Shock either, so there's no interaction to counter what your opponent is doing. But the Might of the Meeks give you excellent card draw with the Leyline of Resonance. I do think this is a little bit high, personally. I think I would be running a little bit lower land count, but yeah, so Operation Win by turn 2 with this one was successfully done. The other deck that has been performing really well, and I think better than Rakdos Aggro for if you look at the large amount of data as opposed to just personal people hitting Mythic, Boros Auras has been doing particularly well, and which is why it was the top of my best of one review. And gosh, sorry. The this one was Boros Auras by Dom Tinbai, and it's basically the core card, the super important card, is Sheltered by Ghosts. This card is insane. Basically, if you can play a turn 1 creature, Heartfire Hero, Optimistic Scavenger, Cacophony Scamp is included in some lists, and then hit it with a Sheltered by Ghosts, you win most of the games that you do that because of the Ward 2 and the lifelink. So they can't remove it with interaction until turn 3 at the earliest, and then you're gaining life that outraces like the Rakdos Aggro and the mono red strategies. Then you have the core of the Heartfire Hero, Manifold Mouse, and Emberheart Challenger. Every time red is involved, you're going to see this core existing. And War Squeak is one that we don't usually see included in this kind of strategy, giving something +1/+1 in haste and making it so something can't block. Fits into the enchantment strategy. Usually we see a little bit further high roll with the Atali's Favor. But I like the addition of the War Squeak. I think it even lets you go maybe a little further down in lands. The other thing too that I think was worth noting about this build was the Fabled Passages, and so you can go turn 1 into Sheltered by Ghosts. The downside with that strategy is if they have a cut down, if they have a shock, if they have Afara's Dispersal, like they're not into the Floodmaw. Like if they have any of that one-costed interaction, they can punish the turn 1 play. Whereas if you wait a turn, if you play a tap land, then you can play Optimistic Scavenger or Heartfire Hero on turn 2 and protect it from their interaction with the Shard Mage's Rescue. So I think that the tap lands actually work pretty well in this, depending on how often you're bumping into that cheap removal. And then you can get the Sheltered Ghosts into play while having the Shard Mage's Rescue up. So kind of an interesting take on it. Still keeping the Thran portal in here so that you do have that flexibility of being able to cast the Optimistic Scavenger or the Heartfire Hero on turn 1. And yeah, just kind of an interesting take on the Boros Auras strategy. And the second version here is Boros Auras by Roy Denier, and 141 and 69 for a 67% win rate into Mythic. And forgot to write down which Mythic number it was, but yeah, it was one of the numbered Mythics. Looked good. No MMR Shenanigans. And so this one is a little bit more... this one is also ditching the Atali's Favor, which I personally have liked the Atali's Favor. It does have a little bit of like chaos to it, but when you roll into another enchantment, it's almost like playing 2 enchantments in one go, and you can hit it. It's less consistent, right? It's more gambly. It's a little bit more of like this high roll. So instead of the Atali's Favor, we've got the Monastery Swift Spears coming in to just give us a little bit more target for our enchantments. So it's definitely one way to take it. They kept the lands a little bit more of like the traditional build that we're seeing with the Thran portals, and they went with the 20 lands, which I think is pretty common with this deck, with how much you want to be double spelling in this archetype. And the last one that I'd like to mention is Azorius Oculus by Harafn Sulfur. I went 97 and 65 for a 60% win rate. And I've seen people have success with this deck. A lot of times, this week, a lot of the decks kind of squeaked in at 59% win rate. So these are the ones that all just like scraped by at 60%. And so really just coming down to like the difference of a game or something like that, you know? But anyway, this one bringing in a little bit of tech against the mono red from what we've seen in best of 3. So it is running the Haughty Djinn and the Abhorrent Oculus and not the Mentor, which I think has kind of been deemed the superior build for this space. But Afara's Dispersal and Elspeth's Smite really helps this deck against the turn 2 win and the turn 3 win that we were talking about with Rakdos Aggro. And so the list that I covered, I believe, was missing the Elspeth's Smite and the Afara's Dispersal on Monday. and brought in temporary lockdown. And I think the temporary lockdown works really well against the Boros Auras deck, right? So you can see that the creator of this deck has taken the core of the Azorius Oculus build and teched in some of the flex spots, some of the some hate against the more popular decks that you might be bumping into. So they still have the core of like the Recommission and the Helping Hand to have the 6 Reanimator spells for the Djinn and the Oculus. We've got the Get Lost and Chart a Course and a lot of the same cards. So Phantom Interference, 3 Steps Ahead. They took down the Sleight of Hand quite a bit, and this one allows you to kind of have a lower land count. So they're going with 20 lands and lowering the Sleight of Hand. So I think they're cheesing it just a little bit, but it worked for them. And yeah, so generally you're just doing like a mill strategy, trying to use your spells to get a high spell count to then just kill them in one turn with the Haughty Djinn. And you can use your graveyard to hard cast the Oculus. Usually it's better to reserve the graveyard and discard it off of something like Chart a Course, and then reanimate it so that you don't have to exile the 6 cards from your graveyard. But yeah, really interesting deck, fun to play around with, and curious to see what its final build actually becomes. So thanks for hanging out on a Sunday with me. If you have any comments, leave them below. Happy to talk to you. You know, try to keep. This week was particularly filled with a lot of vitriol, where people were like, this deck is not good, and I'm here to help. I'm just trying to show what's on the data, and if you don't want to look at the data and be like, if you disagree with the data, then that's fine. I don't know what else I can do to help you. So, with that though, I'll be on tomorrow to talk about my best of 1, best of 3 meta review, where we go over the tracker data for how the decks have been performing from Bronze to Mythic. So not just looking at successfully Mythic piloted decks. And then on Tuesday, we'll be doing the first community deck tech. I can only cover 4, and I will be giving priority to people who are YouTube members. So if you want to join and help support the community, it's always an option. You can click join below. There's a couple of different options as far as like, do you want the minimum? Do you want deck, you want me to deck tech anything that you ever send to me? Do you want private coaching, etc.? So you can check it out there. And have a wonderful day. I hope you all had a good weekend, and I will catch you on Monday.